Good morning, biology. Happy Tuesday. So, looks like it's going to be a sunny day, which is awesome. Hope you can get out and enjoy it a little bit. For today, I do have a trivia for you. Maybe you know this one. What is the most poisonous fish to eat? Seems like this one is people know, kind of. Some people. It's the pufferfish. However, it's just one part of the fish that is poisonous. So in some areas, people still consume it and kind of think of it as a delicacy, but it must be prepared correctly, or you could potentially die. Doesn't seem worth it, but who knows? All right. So we just have a little bit left on our notes to finish up. So here we go. All right. Excuse me. So in a population, whatever it is, we got some flowers, some fungus, some animals, whatever, all up here. They actually tend to stay fairly stable. So the allele frequencies in a population usually remain relatively stable. Basically, that population is not changing. Okay. A lot of these organisms have been on this planet for a pretty long time, and they're pretty well adapted. So if a population stays large, which means, it doesn't get, it wouldn't be like on the endangered species list, right? It has kept a large population, and it is well adapted to its environment, which you would think if it's around, still it is. However, the environment does change, right? And humans tend to change it as well pretty quickly. So, however, if that population is large and well adapted to its environment, it's usually pretty stable. We call that at equilibrium. The allele frequencies aren't changing. And so we would say that population is not evolving. It's staying pretty steady. Okay. So lots of times this is what a population is at. Okay. A crocodile would be a great example. Hasn't really changed much since the time of the dinosaurs. All right. However, sometimes allele frequencies do change. And when that happens, we call that evolution. The population is evolving. And that could be directional, like in a way that will benefit that population, like through natural selection, which we talked about in the last sets of notes. Or it could be, whoa, what just happened? It could be kind of random. All right. So one way, and there's 4 ways, and you're going to need to remember these. So 4 ways that allele frequencies can change in a population. One is a mutation. Obviously, the allele frequencies are changing if a mutation has occurred because we have this sudden small change, this new allele. Okay. Now, if that allele is not beneficial, it might stick around, but in really, really low numbers. Or if it is harmful, natural selection would probably occur and it'd probably go away. Okay. So, and then if it's beneficial, maybe natural selection would work through that population from that mutation and cause it to become more common in the population. A great example is these mice down in the corner. This is a specific mouse species that lives in the Florida Keys, which is like kind of beachy area, right? And they used to all be like brown and black variations, more like the one on the left. There was a random mutation not that long ago, and some gray mice popped up. And well, mice are kind of preyed upon by a lot of things, especially birds in that area. And if you're running across sand, which one of these mice is going to stick out a little bit more? Well, probably the brown mice. And that's exactly what happened. And now this mutation for gray mice in this area has become a lot more common in the population. All right. In asexually reproducing organisms like bacteria, and I added this ... There's not room on your notes, but if you wanted to add it on the back or something, they depend on mutations for their variation because they don't sexually reproduce. So that can get passed on pretty rapidly in those fast reproducing organisms like bacteria. Like you could get a mutation in your body, and that bacteria might be, if they could be like resistant to some drug or something like that. All right. The next one is maybe not the population as a whole, but a specific population. Migration into or out of that population can cause a change in the gene pool, and that's called gene flow, and it's actually a good thing. Okay, we don't want a population to get completely isolated from other populations of the same species. And if they do, lots of times they'll adapt to that new environment and they may change enough to become a new species. Islands are great examples of that. But if migration can occur, if gene flow can occur, there will be new alleles moving in and out of that population. That's good. It increases variation and increases the ability for the organism to be able to adapt to the environment. And actually, large animal populations, like not large in number, but large in size, like bear, let's say, elk, things like that. We actually have a program, I think it's still going on, in Montana and Canada called Yellowstone to the Yukon, where they're trying to keep these corridors between populations of these big animals open. Okay. And so that will increase gene flow and increase the health of all those populations. So there's certain areas that we know that the animals move through, and we try and keep those open, like not as much fencing. Definitely, like if you could see these population of the purple populations up in the corner, if we built like a super highway between population A and then all the other populations through those 3 corridors, it would basically cut off that population. Whenever a population is small, weird things can happen to the alleles, and lots of times it makes them less fit, and it can sometimes make them so unstable that they'll just die out in that area. Okay, so we would want to be careful of that. All right. So why you might be wondering why the Great Wall of China is on there, but actually it has cut off migration from some smaller animals, and we have different species, closely related species on both sides of the wall. Kind of interesting. All right. The next one is genetic drift. Okay, so genetic drift is actually a bad thing in general. It is where, I think I have one more picture. There we go. It is where you just see really random change in a population because it all of a sudden is very small. It's a worry with endangered species. It happens, I thought I had one more picture, I guess not, because the species goes through what we call a bottleneck. And if you look at those 2 like little circles there, and it's saying, well, there's a whole bunch of light colored whatever, I guess it's 20 pink and 10 red. Let's say those are alleles for some trait. If it goes through a bottleneck, and a bottleneck can be caused by environmental things, like maybe a flood, or it could be caused by human intervention, like urban sprawl or overhunting. But it tends to be something that is pretty dramatic and wipes out a big chunk of the population, and it's not like it's random which ones survive. It's not directional. It's not like some are more fit so they survive. It's just like they happen to not be in the flood zone. So if we go through a bottleneck, you have this little small piece of the pie left. And as you can see, you have a lot more red left, or you have more red than pink left. And that wasn't representative of the whole. So maybe the pink was more of an advantage. And so all of a sudden you don't have those traits. Sometimes some species can go through such a bottleneck that it's almost like once they start to repopulate a little bit, it's almost like all the organisms in that population are almost twins because they have such a limited gene pool to reestablish. The harp seal is a great example because it was almost wiped out by the fur trade. Cheetahs are a pretty good example. They've gone through two bottlenecks, Ice Age and then human poaching and things. And so they're very, very similar now. And when you don't have variation, you're less able to adapt. One kind of interesting random human example, we are not left out of this. We are, living organisms. These forces can work on us as well. And so when the Amish people first settled here in the United States, now they're kind of like their own population because they very rarely marry outside of their group. Okay, so they're kind of like their own human population. And it just happens to be when they settled here, they had a much higher allele frequency of dwarfism in their population. And throughout the years, that has continued. That is not a trait that's advantageous to them in any way. And actually, dwarfism is a disadvantage because if you get two dwarfism alleles, that embryo will not be brought to term. So the fact that they had this higher population was just random, and now they've maintained it in the population throughout the years. Last one, and this is really the only beneficial or directional, I should say, way allele frequencies can change, meaning we can move the species in a certain direction, and that's through non-random mating. Okay, the three examples of non-random mating are artificial selection, which we've discussed. That's where humans choose what characteristics to pass on, like domestic animals are a great example of that. The second one, we also talked about this before, is natural selection. And this is where those traits that are beneficial become more common in the population because those organisms can live longer, attract more mates, and reproduce more. Okay. One we haven't talked about, the third kind of non-random mating, is sexual selection. And this is kind of like if you've ever seen a characteristic where you're like, geez, that doesn't seem like that's going to help that species survive. But it's like in the population as a whole, like you see it a ton. It probably has to do with sexual selection because sexual selection trumps all. Because biologically speaking, the most important thing is to breed and pass on your traits. So the birds are a great example because males, like this male pheasant in the corner, have these crazy bright feathers, sometimes huge amounts of plumage, like think about the peacock. Those things are not very energy efficient and they don't help them survive. But it helps them get a mate, and that is the most important thing, biologically speaking. So the quickest way we can kind of see directional change in a population is through non-random mating. All right. And those are the 4 ways we can see allele frequencies change in a population: mutation, migration, genetic drift, and non-random mating. All right. Awesome. Look for some questions on these tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.